So we're going to do the summary of chapter 1, and then we get into some of the details. So we have a bit of reading to do. We're going to read, discuss, and just alternate reading and discussing. I don't want to do all the reading. That's going to get boring. So we can have some volunteers do bits and pieces of reading, and after each piece of reading, we kind of discuss and then move along until we get through the whole novella and we have all our questions answered, right? But I'll start the ball rolling. Chapter 1, summary. The story begins with Mr. Jones, the neglectful owner of Manor Farm, locking up the hen houses for the night. Due to his drunkenness, he forgets to secure everything properly before heading to bed. Once the farmhouse lights are off, the animals gather in the big barn for a meeting led by Old Major, a wise old boar. The pigs and dogs sit at the front, while the other animals find places throughout the barn. Old Major, knowing he doesn't have much time left because he's old and he's going to die soon, intends to share his thoughts on their harsh lives and the dream he recently had. Old Major describes how humans exploit the animals, taking the fruits of their labor while giving them little in return. He insists that the animals must unite and overthrow their human oppressors to create a better life for themselves. Using terms like comrades, Old Major emphasizes that all animals are equal and should treat one another as such, while humans are their common enemy. He warns that after the rebellion, the animals must never adopt human behaviors, such as drinking alcohol, sleeping in beds, or trading. To conclude the gathering, Old Major teaches the animals a song called Beasts of England, which speaks of a utopian future free from human tyranny. When we say utopian, we mean this kind of perfect world, right? It's a kind of paradise world where it's not that there's no sin or no evil, but things are optimized in a way where humans can live in peace and harmony. The opposite of utopian. Do you know the opposite of utopian? What is the opposite end of that, where things are terrible? It's a nice literature term. So utopian is wonderful, paradise-like. The opposite of that is dystopian. We talk about dystopian literature, dystopian movies, dystopian films. Films like Maze Runner, Hunger Games, Mad Max Fury. These are dystopian. They show us a future where things go wrong. And a utopia is a future where things go right. So this is what Old Major is talking about, right? It's a utopian future for the animals where humans are not in control. The animals enthusiastically sing it together until Mr. Jones, disturbed by the noise, fires his gun into the barn, bringing the meeting to an abrupt end. This is basically what happens in chapter 1, right? And if you have your animal farms out now, which I hope you do, you'll be able to cross-reference and see that this is a pretty good summary, right? Pretty good summary. We have this meeting. I have some images here. I like to add images to things that I make, right? Images kind of speak to us a little bit more than words sometimes. This definitely looks like Old Major, right? Very old boar at the end of his ropes, but he has a lot of wisdom. He has a lot to say. And basically, he's kind of waking them up. It's almost like the beginning of woke culture. You know, of being woke, right? It's a pretty recent terminology in that way. Like recognizing the reality we're in and trying to do something about it. That's what being woke is all about. So Old Major is waking them up like, come on. We can't continue to live like this. We have to strive towards a future where we are in control, where we can all be equals and we can all live outside of this tyranny that we're under right now. Yeah. Do we find chapter 1 to be an interesting chapter? What do we think about chapter 1?
One of the most ironic things about this particular scene is the one where he quotes, "Man is the only real enemy we have. Remove man from the scene and the root cause of hunger and overwork is abolished forever." And that is in stark contrast to what happens to the dead end of the book, when the pigs and men can't, the animals remain in a starvation mode and they can't tell the difference between the men and the pigs later on.
Yeah. So it's always interesting. You know, it might sound like a waste of time, but I recommend whenever you read a nice novel or novella, don't just read it once, read it twice. And the reason is on the second reading of a text, you start to enjoy the foreshadowing. Because when you read a text just once, you're not able to realize that the author is setting up certain things from the beginning. Because, of course, you don't know what's coming next. So you're surprised when things happen and you didn't even catch the hints. But when you're reading something the second time around, you start to say, oh, wait, this is going somewhere. Right? This is hinting at something that's coming 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 chapters down the line. And these are some of the things that are foreshadowed, man being the real enemy. But in the end, we can't even separate man from pig. So who is the enemy then? Is it man? Is it pig? Is it a certain philosophy that the pigs inherited from man? When we look at the commandments, even though the commandments, I think, were the commandments fully outlined in this chapter? I'm looking at the novel while I'm looking at the guide that I've created. Yeah, I think the commandments were outlined a little bit later on, like formalized in chapter 2. But even before then, we're getting some hints of what the commandments will entail, right? And we know that all of those commandments were eventually broken, shattered by the pigs. So we do see some ironies, and even though Old Major is describing a utopia, we know that it eventually becomes a dystopia in the end, right? Very, very interesting stuff. We're gonna look at the character of Old Major a little bit down the line, because he's a very important character, of course. So some key quotes from the chapter. 5 quotes that I want us to pay close attention to and be able to discuss these quotes, right? Man is the only real enemy we have. I've actually just mentioned this particular one. Remove man from the scene and the root cause of hunger and overwork is abolished forever. Very significant quote. You might see it appear in a question, or you might get a chance to quote it in your own essay, right? The significance. Old Major's belief that humans are the root of the animal suffering. It lays the ideological foundation for the rebellion, because this is why they eventually rebel. Oh, we need to get rid of humans. And if you want to get into the political, the historical political aspect of it, this reflects the Marxist, talk about Karl Marx, right? The Marxist idea about class struggle and positions, and, how the ruling class exploits the classes below. So it's the idea that, okay, if humans are the root cause of our hunger, then the only way forward would be to get rid of humans. That's a common sense approach. We need to overthrow the humans so that the root cause of our problems will go away. Of course, the irony is the pigs who vote to overthrow the humans end up becoming humans 2.0 in the end, right? Another important quote is this one. All men are enemies. All animals are comrades. With this quote, the animals have a banner under which they can unite. All right, I'm a pig, you're a dog, you're a sheep. But guess what? We are all comrades. We all have a common enemy. And one technique that, classic historical political manipulators have used to, let's say, unite their people, or to get them to work in harmony, or to get them to forget about their own oppression, is to say, guess what? You all have a common enemy. Let's focus on that. Don't worry about the situation you're in right now. Don't worry about how badly I am treating you, etc. You all have a common enemy. So let's all fight that enemy together. That's something that has been said in so many different ways across history, by leaders. In this case, this solidarity amongst the animals that Old Major is trying to create is what will later lead to the 7 commandments being formed. And it's the idea behind the revolution. All men are enemies, all animals are comrades. So it creates this kind of duality now where you're on one side or the other. If you're an animal, it doesn't matter what animal you are. You're one of us, and we have a common enemy. And so this serves to unite the animals. And then the third important quote stems from that one, right? It's going to be hard to memorize all of these line by line, but, some of the lines will stand out to us over time. No animal must ever tyrannize over his own kind. Weak or strong, clever or simple, we're all brothers. Same idea of solidarity, right? And then the fact that tyrannize is mentioned, it's hinting at what humans. So this quote is also indicating that becoming human-like is a sin. It's a sin to be like a human. What do humans do? They tyrannize, right? Humans take control. Humans oppress. No animal must ever do that. And obviously, this is a big slap in the face when you look at what happens in the end. Because in the end, this is exactly what the pigs do. They tyrannize over their own. So these are some quotes from chapter 1 that kind of foreshadow what's coming. Not in terms of these are going to be achieved, but in terms of the very opposite will be achieved by the pigs, right? Two more interesting quotes from this chapter. And of course, you can find other quotes that are interesting. These are just some quotes that I found very interesting. This is from the song here. Beasts of England and beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land and clime. Hearken to my joyful tidings of the golden future time. What is the meaning of this song? This song becomes an important recurring motif across the whole novel, or across maybe the first half of the novel. The song comes up quite a lot. This Beasts of England song, it's a symbol of the hope and unity that's connected to the revolution, right? It's their dream. This is like their dream in a song, right? Beasts of England, beasts of Ireland, beasts of every land. So it's a unity not just across Animal Farm, but Old Major's dream is one that is far-reaching. He's saying all animals across the world basically will come together one day and overthrow the enemy. So this shows how ambitious the dream is. It's not just Animal Farm, and later in the text we hear a little bit about other farms, other animals and other farms kind of catching on to this philosophy of Old Major, right? So it's a far-reaching ideal. Yeah. Another quote that I found pretty interesting. Remember also that in fighting against man, we must not come to resemble him. Even when we have conquered him, do not adopt his vices. Another statement that gets completely disrespected by the pigs later on. Critical foreshadowing. Because we know that eventually the pigs do defeat man, but the pigs do come to resemble man so much that the animals at the end literally cannot tell them apart from humans. So they do conquer man, but they adopt man's vices. Yeah. Any other interesting quotes? Any other quotes you guys found worthy of being remembered? These are 5 that I found interesting, but there might be more. You can take some time to glance through the chapter and see if anything stands out to you. Found these quotes interesting. Ooh, another nice one. Man is the only creature that conceives without producing. That's another interesting quote. Yeah. It really shows that, man isn't even doing anything. All they're doing is taking. How evil.
So may I interject, please?
Of course.
There is this part in the novel where it has, let's face it, our lives are miserable, laborious and short. We are born and given just so much food that will keep us. And so Old Major went through that part of the life of the animals on Animal Farm. He ends it with, the life of an animal is misery and slavery. That is the plain truth. I just found that the entire paragraph there was the entire book. That just said everything that was going to happen in this entire fable.
Yeah, I just found that very quote. Now, comrades, what is the nature of this life of ours? Let us face it, our lives are miserable, laborious, and short. We're born, we're given just so much food as will keep the breath in our bodies, and those of us who are capable of it are forced to work to the last atom of our strength. Wow, it's a very powerful quote, very powerful quotation, right? And it all feeds into the evil of man. Man has made our lives meaningless. Our only purpose is to be slaves and to be fed just enough that we can serve man's purposes. So it's definitely a wake-up call to the animals. Look at yourselves. Look at our lives. Look at the state of our existence. How can we sit back and not do anything? The word miserable is used a couple of times in the novel, even in this very chapter. Why then do we continue in this miserable condition? That's just a bit later down, yeah, and further down. And even the miserable lives we lead are not allowed to reach their natural span, yeah, because they work so hard, and then some of them are killed to be eaten before they live out their lives. So yeah, it's really another quote signifying why we need to rebel as animals. What about some themes? Let's look at these 2 themes in chapter 1, and then we can discuss some others. All right, who wants to do some of the reading for me?
Chapter 1 Themes: Class struggle and oppression. The themes of class struggle is central in this chapter. Old Major's speech highlights the divide between the oppressed, the animals, and the oppressors, the humans, particularly Mr. Jones. This dynamic mirrors Marxist ideas of class conflict, where the working class is exploited by those in power. Old Major's speech lays the groundwork for the animals' rebellion by identifying humans as the source of their oppression. Revolution. Old Major's speech is a direct call to revolution. He tells the animals that overthrowing Mr. Jones is the only way they can escape their suffering and create a fairer society. This theme of revolution is foundational to the story as it mirrors historical revolutions, particularly the Russian Revolution. However, the tone of Old Major's warnings suggests that revolutions, while hopeful, may not lead to the utopia envisioned at the outset.
Continue, Sarita.
Unity and solidarity. Old Major stresses that unity is the key to the animals' success. He insists that they must all work together regardless of their species because humans are their common enemy. This theme of solidarity is crucial to the animals' initial success, but it also foreshadows the fractures that will occur in their unity once power dynamics shift later in the story. Language has power. In this chapter, Old Major's use of language is the first instance where we see how powerful words can be. His speech inspires the animals, fills them with hope, and sparks their desire for change. As the novel progresses, Orwell explores how language can be used not just to inspire, but also to manipulate and control. Old Major's eloquent use of the language here foreshadows how figures like Squealer will later use rhetoric to deceive animals into submission.
Thank you. This is one of the major themes of Animal Farm, the power of language. A little bit broader, the power of education, how the literate pigs were able to manipulate the other animals because of their higher level of education. But language in particular is seen as, is wielded as a tool, it's weaponized, right? Language. How is language used to overthrow, to conquer, to manipulate? So we see language being used to inspire at the beginning, to inspire change, to catalyze, to get the animals to wake up. But we know, because we've read the text, that not long from now, Squealer and the other pigs will use language to manipulate and to brainwash. Nothing short of brainwashing. Yeah. Is this something that we're able to see in real life, where language can be used to such great effect that people can be brainwashed by words? Do we think this is just a story kind of thing, or do we think this is a realistic possibility? Is this a real thing?
It's real up to now. It's what all it's what all politicians use effectively to control the masses. It is fact.
Yeah.
I swear sometimes every political regime, no matter which side they lie on, they've all studied Animal Farm.
Oh yeah. As a politician, this is the first novel you read. I imagine. I imagine, Politics 101, the textbook is Animal Farm. Let's go through Squealer's works. Yeah. And it doesn't mean you're a deceptive politician, right? It just means you're an effective politician. Whether you're advocating for things that are positive or negative, for things that are nefarious or morally upstanding, you need the power of language. You need to be able to communicate your ideas in a passionate way that will inspire, that will tug at the hearts of your listeners, that will make people feel empowered, that will make people feel ashamed if they need to feel ashamed, that will make people want to stand up and fight. Whether you are a military leader, leading your men to die on the battlefield, or you are Donald Trump, standing in front of millions, you have to be able to use language in such a way where you are able to really impact the minds of the masses. And this story really shows us that. It shows us in an exaggerative way, but I think it's still realistic, where when someone has mastered language, in Animal Farm, they are literally able to brainwash and to alter memories, to change your memories. But even though it seems so far-fetched, there are persons who are so good with language that they can brainwash, they can gaslight you in such a way that they make you think that something happened even when it didn't happen. They're able to alter your thoughts, your thought processes. They can make you doubt your own memories because of how they're able to manipulate the language to, spin whatever narrative they want to spin. So it's interesting that at the beginning of the text, we kind of see language being used in that powerful way, in that positive way. But later on, this same language that was used positively to get the animals to, fight for their rights, essentially, that same power of language is used to again restrict and manipulate and control the animals. So language can be used in a positive or negative way, right? It's a recurring idea in this text. All right. Let's take a look at some characters. Haley, you with us?
Yes, sir.
All right. Tell us about these chapter 1 characters, please.
Old Major. Old Major serves as the ideological father of the rebellion. His speech is a powerful critique of the way humans treat animals, and his vision for a society built on equality and freedom is what drives the animals to rebel. He represents figures like Karl Marx or Lenin, whose revolutionary ideas inspire political movements. His role in the story is both visionary and cautionary, as his warnings about the corrupting influence of power foreshadowing the betrayal of his ideals later in the novel. Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones represents the inept and careless ruling class. His negligence and mistreatment of the animals symbolize the failings of the capitalist system in which the ruling elite exploit the working class. His drunkenness and inability to proper care for his farm foreshadows the eventual collapse of his authority, making the animals rebel feel inevitable. Molly the cat. Molly with her love for sugar and ribbons, and the indifferent cat represents those who are comfortable under the current system and are uninterested in the rebellion. Molly's attachment to human luxury symbolizes the middle class or bourgeois who are reluctant to give up their privileges. The cat's indifference reflects the attitudes of individuals who avoid political involvement as long as their immediate needs are met. Boxer and Clover. Boxer and Clover, the hard-working horses, represent the loyal working class. Boxer's strength and dedication symbolizes the willingness of the proletariat to work tirelessly for the cause, while Clover's gentle nature shows her nurturing side. Together they illustrate the strength of the working class, which will be vital in driving the rebellion forward.
Nice. Thank you. When you look at the characters of this text, I want us to imagine the characters as more character types, more personalities that we can find in the real world. So we have, for example, we have many old majors in the real world. We have many Mr. Joneses. We have many Mollys, many Boxers, many Clovers. What do these animals, what set of people, what kind of people does each animal relate to? When you look at the real world in a political sense, in a societal sense, right? We already talked about Old Major. These are the older people with the big ideas of change and rebellion. The persons who are so experienced that they have a bird's eye view on reality. They are able to recognize that, if things continue as is, things will only spiral downwards and the dystopia will never end. But they're also able to imagine a different world, imagine a changed world. But these older people with the big ideas, they are not able to enact the vision, right? They are only able to pass the message on to the next generation, hoping that they will be able to do something about it, right? And you have the Mr. Joneses now. These are the ones at the top, the ruling class, or ruling in a very tyrannical manner, right? It's really an iron fist kind of situation. But I want us to focus a little bit more now on Molly, the cat, Boxer, Clover. How can we relate these characters to real people or real types of people now, 2025 Caribbean? That's what we're dealing with. In the exam, we're going to need to extrapolate ideas and characters from the text, and perhaps we're going to have to relate that to real life, because literature isn't meant to stay in the pages. We have to take ideas and see how they relate to things that are happening in the real world. So who are the Mollys of today? Who are the Clovers of today? What do these characters represent? Can we see ourselves in these people? Can we see others in these people, in these animals? And are these characters kind of a warning that we shouldn't become like them? Or are they a calling to become like them? What are these characters saying to us now in 2025, socio or politically? What do we think of Molly? What type of person is Molly, right, in the real world?
Somebody who only cares about herself and not the issues surrounding her.
So let's try to make Molly into a person, Haley. Tell me about Molly's life. Tell me about Molly. This imagined real life Molly. In what way does she care only about herself and doesn't care about each?
For example, later on, when she goes over to the other farm because she wants the sugar cubes and the grooming, and doesn't care about other animals on the farm and what they stand for. And when she wants to learn the alphabet, she only learns her name because she's so addicted with herself.
Yeah, it's quite self-centered, not really concerned with societal issues. But how can she not be concerned? Isn't she a part of the society? How can she detach herself from what's happening?
Probably because she's been favored and she's known this lifestyle, and she knows that when they do the rebellion, she's gonna lose something that she once loved. So she doesn't pay attention to the rebellion.
So Molly is comfortable enough to not care. We can put it that way, right? She has whatever she needs. So let's say we're talking about real life now, stepping away from Animal Farm into the real world. This nice lady, she has a nice cushy job. She has a house. She's driving an SUV. Her kids are going to prep school. So who cares about the violence down in the ghetto? Who cares about the inequality and the gender gap? I'm fine. I have what I need. If I were to start rebelling and loading up my voice about change, I might lose some of the privileges that I have, right? So in the real world, there are going to be people who are not suffering as much as those below them. And so they don't have as much motivation to try to change anything. They don't want to mess up the little bubble they're able to live in. And so it's easier for them to just detach themselves from whatever rebellion is going on, whatever fight is happening, whatever march is happening on the streets. They're good. They're not necessarily rich, but they are not poor enough to put themselves out there on the line. So Molly and the cat are kind of these caricatures, right? They're depicting these kinds of people who are comfortable enough to enjoy some luxuries, and so they're not really motivated to go there and urgently protest. So they become a little bit somewhat indifferent towards the what's happening. But on the other hand, now we have Boxer and Clover. What kind of people in the real world could we relate these characters to? Boxer, Clover.
So these Boxer and Clover would represent the working class, the true people who put together an economy and who believe that if the government says, I'm going to give you something less, but you go ahead and continue to work hard for me, they're going to do it. I want to use the word blindly, but
Me too.
you
Yeah.
I mean, we see that right here in my own country, and the head scratching moment for us. But yeah, they represent the hardest working members of any country, and you do see the political system, whichever government is in power, reaping apples and milk from the Boxers and Clovers.
Yeah. These are the people who pull the weight. In Animal Farm, they're literally pulling the weight, especially Boxer, but it's not just literal. These are the people who are really driving the economy forward. They're putting in the hours in the 9 to 5. They are the ones actually doing the stuff. You have people above them, the policy makers, the people who are sitting in their armchairs, talking and giving orders. These are the ones following the orders. Right? And yes, there's a point at which some of these people are, not just a point, because some people spend a whole lifetime just working with blind loyalty, right? Contributing to a system. And unfortunately, it sounds terrible, but these are your teachers. These are your government workers, right? These are the people who, I started teaching at what age? Pretty young, 20, maybe 23. And these are the people who retired 65. I've taught for 40 years. They get a nice little plaque thank you for your service. You've put in so much. You've worked so hard. You get a measly pension at the end. You have to struggle and fight to get whatever benefits you should be getting, right? We see how Boxer ends up. He's giving all these promises. Oh yeah, you're gonna get this pasture over there. You're gonna be able to graze, live out your life. But eventually, work 5 more years. We're gonna reduce that. We're gonna reduce this. But the only thing not being reduced is how much work you're asked to do. And the danger is these people are working with good hearts. They're trying to do their best to serve their country. But what happens is when those at the top are just using them and manipulating them and taking advantage of their loyalty, then we get the tragedy of Boxer. Because Boxer is a tragic character. He's not a character that you want to be when you read this novel. It's a character that you really pity in the end. And so we have to think, who are we like Boxer without even realizing? Are we pitiable? Are we just working, doing, following the orders? But in the end, we're not necessarily reaping anything for ourselves, for our families, for our own, generations down the line. Is that the case? And Boxer and Clover, the working class, the people who pull the weight, they are continually exploited. First by the humans, then by the pigs. They're continually exploited. They're the ones who work the hardest, and they are disproportionately exploited. What I mean is they are strong enough. They're stronger than those who can't work. So they are strong enough to work, but they're not rich enough to retire and relax or just, do something cushy, do something easy. Just start their own business. They don't have the capital to go start their own business, still looking at the real world. And so they're on this treadmill. They're just in the grind. Decades are passing and they're being squeezed. They're being milked. They're the ones paying a disproportionate amount of the taxes, right? They're the honest workers who are always paying their taxes. They're not skipping out on anything, right? They're always showing up to the political meetings. They're always contributing. They're always doing. And of course, you might say, but isn't that being a good citizen? Isn't that a good thing to contribute to your nation? There comes a point, there comes a line that you cross when your loyalty is blind to the point where you're not even realizing that you are not benefiting from whatever is happening. And the persons benefiting aren't the ones doing the work, right? So Boxer especially is quite tragic, in my opinion, right? He's very strong. He's very dedicated. He's very willing. And so he's a prime target for the tyrannical government. He's a prime victim. He's the perfect type of person for them to sell the fake promises to, right? For them to exploit and for them to give him these long work contracts for him to continue to work. And then when it's time for him to retire and reap the reward, the government becomes quiet. All of a sudden, the communication lines break down, and the same people who used to be on your phone and in your inbox 24/7, they can't even reach them anymore. They're no longer interested in you once you have reached a point where you are not giving them what you used to give them. So it's really a cycle of exploitation. So when you are now to, retire, take it easy, or when you have made enough money somehow by some miracle to get out of that system and to do something else, they are not interested in you anymore. They are going to look for the new Boxers down the line, the new Clovers. So Boxer becomes a tragic character in the novel. He starts off as maybe an admirable character, but he becomes tragic because his loyalty is just it's a blind loyalty. And these are the people who don't question things, unfortunately. They go with the flow, or maybe they question things, but only in a very limited way. And so they eventually just continue to work themselves into the ground, right? Very, very tragic. Very, very tragic. So here, the characters introduced in chapter 1, they kind of give us a whole society. We have the old majors, those who recognize our situation and they try to inspire change in the upcoming generation. We have the Mr. Joneses who are on top, beating down on everybody below them, beating down on the 90%. We have a few who are, below the upper class, but they're not quite in the lower class, kind of upper middle-ish, like Molly and the cat, who they don't really have to care too much about the overall condition of the country. because they have their money. Who cares if my community is poor? I have money, right? I have my car, so I don't care if public transportation is crappy because I can get around. I don't care about how bad the public schools are because my son is going to private school, right? So you have the mollies and the cats who are not struggling enough to care. And then you have the boxer clover. They are the ones who are pulling the weight. They're struggling the most, but they're also working the hardest. And then, of course, you will have some below, like the sheep, who aren't really important yet, who aren't even able to work as hard as boxer and clover. They're not even able to think. They are just kind of taking up space. They're just numbers, pretty much. So you have this core group of workers who they are doing 80% of the work, but 20% of the pay. They are pulling the weight of the country. And this entire system is dependent on these workers. And the irony is, if these workers were able to recognize their value, if they were able to, if Boxer was able to say, wait a minute, the pigs can't pull all of these blocks. The dogs can't pull all of these blocks. If I stop pulling blocks, what are they going to do? If these workers were able to recognize how valuable they actually were and how much the ruling class depends on their loyalty, they would easily be able to start dictating their own terms, right? Later on in the novel, we see where Boxer had his hoof on one of the dogs' necks, I think. He could have killed those 9 dogs by himself. He could have crushed Napoleon at any time. These workers have the power to change the tide of the country in one day, right? If every teacher, every nurse, every taxi driver decided I'm not going to work this year I'm staying home. Whatever I plant in my backyard, that's all I'm going to eat. And I'm not going anywhere to buy anything. What would happen? The ruling class wouldn't have anybody to rule. Everything would come to a halt, and then there would have to be some conversation, right? But the persons who are working the hardest, the ones who are actually the busiest people making the most moves, they are too busy being loyal, and they are probably too fearful to stop being loyal, that they're not recognizing that they actually hold the power. Boxer holds so much power on Animal Farm, but he never uses that power in a way that stands up to the pigs. He always just serves the pigs. He carries out the orders, and so he becomes, just a pawn on the chess. And so these are kind of cautionary characters, right? Characters that warn us that we shouldn't be so loyal that we become like them, right? And we have more cautionary characters. Look at Molly, look at the cat. We shouldn't be so comfortable in our luxuries that we ignore the overarching issues of our society, right? So the novel becomes more interesting when you start to look into what these characters, what these story events mean in real life. The thing about Orwell, not just Orwell, but especially George Orwell, the author here, is he's a writer that writes about the real world, but in a slightly fantastical way. So his most famous works are really about politics and history, but they are not presented in that way, where it's obviously about politics and history. So here we have talking animals. That seems like a silly story. But when you look at the characters, when you look at the plot events, you start to draw parallels and you start to recognize that the novel is actually critiquing our society, and we can learn some interesting things. All right, final thing for this session, let's just look at some devices that we can see so far. We have the allegory, which is where we kind of have a story that has a more political message to it, right? That's kind of one meaning. And in this case, Animal Farm is an allegory for the Russian Revolution. It's a little specific. This is something that you'll have to just do a little bit of research into, and then you'll be able to draw some parallels and see how different figures from that time match up to the characters in Animal Farm. The Russian Revolution can be seen in Animal Farm. I don't think CSEC will be bold enough to set a question about the Russian Revolution, but just in case, let's do a little bit of research and see how these prominent figures in history line up with the characters in Animal Farm, right? Foreshadowing is another important device. In chapter 1, Old Major warns about the dangers of becoming human-like, but this just foreshadows that is exactly what the pigs are going to. right? And we have some symbolism. Old Major himself is a symbol representing revolutionary leaders who try to make big, sweeping changes. Mr. Jones, he's a symbol as well. He symbolizes, the old oppressive style of leadership, the tyranny. The song is symbolic. The song, Beast of England, that symbolizes the hope and unity that the animals unite in. The ideology that there's a better future if we unite ourselves. It's we can even go back to the days of the slavery days, and we can imagine the slaves uniting themselves over this dream of freedom. Wow, if we work together, we can actually overthrow the white men. We can turn this dystopia into a utopia, right? So it's a similar thing where this common enemy is used to unite the animals, and the song is what symbolizes all of that, right? So as we read the chapters, we want to look at what different things symbolize. We want to look at what different characters might represent in the real world.